Julia looked ahead through the rain, feeling overwhelmed as her old sedan pulled up across the street, facing the magnificent Carmichael mansion. The massive marble columns and curved iron gates, once symbols of wealth, power, and class, now stood as a tombstone to her life. She slowly turned off the car, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her fingers shaking uncontrollably. The pain of betrayal from years ago felt like a heavy stone pressing down on her chest. The scenery around her blurred before her eyes, not because of the rain running down the windows, but because of the unforgettable memories this house evoked. She sat motionless in the car for a long time, her eyes glued to the familiar scenery through the wet glass. This mansion was the place she had called home, even if only for a short time. But it was a time when she thought she had found happiness. Just 2 years ago, she had dreamed of a life together with the man she trusted and loved with all her heart. But now, sitting here, she was left alone with the broken pieces of the past. Julia remembered the day Eric left her, everything they had built together. He, with his charm and perfect appearance, had made her believe that she was the luckiest woman in the world. He came from a prestigious family, rich and powerful, and she was just a poor teacher with simple dreams. But everything had changed. The promises of a future together forever were just empty lies. Eric did not love her. He loved what she could not provide, an abundance of material things, power and connections. When he abandoned her for a beautiful, arrogant Julia felt like she had been slapped in the face. Not only was she betrayed by the man she was also ostracized by his family. Together they forced her out of the house she thought was her home, leaving her with only shabby furniture and an old suitcase. Everything changed after that. Julia was no longer the wife of a rich man, but a lonely woman struggling to make ends meet. She moved into a small rented room and started over, working odd jobs to make ends meet. Long nights she sat at her old dining table, concentrating on grading students' papers, while her empty stomach growled with hunger. Those months were hard. But it was also those hardships that forged her resilience. Julia knew that no matter how hard things got, she would get through them. That nothing could defeat her. But now, sitting in her old car and looking up at the Carmichael mansion, she wondered if she should go to the will reading. Strangely enough, only a week ago she had read about Richard Carmichael's death in a small newspaper article. He had been a stern, cold man, but he had never treated her badly. They had had polite conversations at family parties, and though he had never interfered with Eric's treatment of her, Julia had occasionally felt a glance of disapproval pass over him. And now somehow she had received an invitation to the reading of his will. The invitation had come to her bearing the Carmichael family crest, a symbol of luxury and power she had only seen at fancy parties to which she had never really belonged. At first she had suspected it was a cruel joke, another insult to her family from Eric. But in the end, curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to go. Even though she knew that she would have to face the people who had abandoned and despised her, she could not refuse this opportunity. When she got out of the car, the rain was still falling, as if the world outside could feel the melancholy in her heart. The door of the villa opened automatically before she could touch the bell. An old servant, with a stern expression, led her inside without saying a word. A strange feeling came over her. The house still had the same scent of polished wood, perfume, and fresh flowers. Everything was the same as before, as if no time had passed since she had last been here. But it was she who had changed. The servant led her to the study where the Carmichael family was gathered. The space in the room was dead silent. All eyes were on her. Surprise, contempt, and curiosity were clearly visible on each person's face. Eric stood there, almost the center of attention, his face unable to hide the confusion when he saw her. But there was something different. Julia felt that his eyes were no longer confident as before, but something both fearful and shy. She stood there, not saying a word, just feeling the tension in the air. No one spoke, only the sound of rain falling steadily outside the window, as if time had stopped and everything was just a confrontation between the past and the present. When Richard Carmichael's will was everyone listened attentively. And a big shock came. No one expected that he would leave Julia a huge fortune, which stunned everyone, including Eric. His will not only changed her life, but also made everyone reconsider their position in this family. Julia was no longer an abandoned woman, but now she was the heiress of a rich and powerful family. But no matter how much wealth she knew that what she really needed was not justice, and she was ready to accept it all from there to continue on the new path she had chosen. Julia stood alone in the large room, her eyes staring out the window, where the warm golden afternoon sunlight shone through the branches of the ancient trees, making their shadows dance on the ground. The coolness of the fresh air felt refreshing. But inside her heart, a cold wind was gradually invading. The peaceful scenery outside could not soothe the tension rising in her chest. She turned around, catching sight of a scene that had long been a pain that could not be relieved. Eric stood there, one arm draped over the shoulder of Cassandra, his new wife. Their eyes were entwined, filled with happiness. The scene was like a knife cutting into Julia's heart, but she was determined not to let them see that pain. She raised her head high, letting her expression become hard and cold, hiding the chaotic emotions that were erupting inside her. "What are you doing here?" Eric's voice was sharp as a knife, breaking the silence in the room. He stepped forward, his face unable to hide his surprise and anger. "You have no right to be here." Julia was not worried. She took a step forward, maintaining her composure. "I was invited," she said calmly, holding up the envelope as undeniable evidence. Her voice was steady, but inside her heart was pounding, as if each beat was a tension that pushed her closer to an unwanted fight. Cassandra did not miss the opportunity, immediately speaking up, her tone full of contempt. "You must be mistaken. This is a private family matter. You have no right to be here." Before Julia could retort, the lawyer, a middle-aged man with silver hair, a sharp and serious appearance, spoke up. "Mrs. Carmichael," he said clearly and without wavering, "you are here because you are the beneficiary of the will of Mr. Richard Carmichael." The lawyer's words were a heavy shock to everyone in the room. Eric's face turned red, his face tensed up as if he were about to explode. Cassandra stood still, her eyes wide as if she had been slapped. The other members of the family began to whisper as well, their eyes darting back and forth between Julia and the lawyer, confusion and anger evident on each face. Julia stood still, not saying a word. She could feel the tension rising in the air, but inside she felt strangely calm. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to explain or justify. Everything was legally confirmed. "This is impossible," Eric shouted, his voice suddenly echoing in the room. He stood up, slamming his hand on the table. "There's no way she could inherit this family." The lawyer calmly looked at Eric, his attitude unwavering. "Mr. Richard Carmichael's will is perfectly legal. If you want to challenge it, you can do so in court. However, I must warn you that Mr. Carmichael has prepared everything very carefully. Any challenge will be difficult to succeed." Eric's face paled, his anger suddenly drained. A feeling of helplessness enveloped him. His gaze towards Julia was no longer filled with arrogance and hatred, but with overwhelming disappointment. His mind was spinning, not understanding why this woman had appeared in his life so suddenly as a legal heir. Julia quietly looked at Eric, feeling as if a small fire was burning in her heart. She had never intended to cause him pain, but now her presence in the will had forced him to face the irreversible. Part of her felt a small victory, even though the reason for her inheritance remained a mystery. But at least she no longer had to endure the contempt of this family. The lawyer continued reading the terms of the will. Before his death, Mr. Richard Carmichael made several important changes to his will. These changes were made privately without the influence of any family members. Julia Carmichael was listed as a direct heir. Every eye in the room turned to Julia. These words were like a slash that shattered all the hopes and beliefs this family had for her. To them, Julia would never be a part of the family. They had thought that this legacy would be theirs, that all that belonged to Carmichael would never fall into her hands. But Julia felt nothing but calm. She paid no attention to the gossip behind her back, no attention to Cassandra's contemptuous glances, no attention to Eric's stiff expression. All she needed was this recognition she had long been denied. When the reading of the will ended, the room was strangely quiet. Everyone avoided Julia's eyes. No one dared to look directly at her. Eric stood there, his hands clenched as if he wanted to tear everything apart. Cassandra looked like she was about to faint, her face pale. The family members quietly left the room, their eyes no longer hiding the anger and confusion. Julia just stood there, silently observing, not moving. She didn't need to say anything. The will said it all. And no matter how things changed, she had a part of this family, that no one could take away. The heavy doors of the mansion behind her shut, and the murmurs of the family faded like a distant echo as Julia stood in the study. Her fingers gripped the parchment tightly, the will clutched in her trembling hands. The lawyer had gone. The others with him, leaving only silence and the weight of what was left unsaid. The room feels colder now, emptier. The sharp scent of polished wood mixed with the earthy smell of old books seemed almost oppressive, as though the very walls were waiting for her to make sense of it all. Julia's mind raced, but one thought persisted above all her life was about to change forever. She stepped out of the mansion into the crisp air. The sky still dark with the remnants of the storm. The rain had stopped. The turmoil inside her was far from over. Questions churned relentlessly in her mind, each one more pressing than the last. Why did Richard include her in his will? What had she ever done to earn his favor? She had been nothing but an outsider in his family's eyes, cast aside by Eric and his relatives, made to feel like an outsider in her own home. As the mansion's towering silhouette receded into the distance, she caught a glimpse of Eric's face in her mind, the look of outrage that had crossed his features when the will was read aloud. There had been a fleeting satisfaction in that moment, but it was quickly overshadowed by confusion. Richard had always been distant, even cold. Why would he leave her such a monumental legacy? Her thoughts were a whirlwind of uncertainty and disbelief. What did she miss? Was there something more to their history that she had failed to understand? Her fingers tightened around the envelope, as though the will itself might offer some comfort or guidance. Her car was parked at the foot of the long, winding driveway that led away from the mansion. As she climbed into the driver's seat, she changed back at the house one last time. For the first time in 4 years, she didn't feel intimidated by its imposing presence. No longer did she feel the sting of rejection from Eric and his family. But even as her exterior remains composed, there was an unsettling unease simmering just beneath the surface. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside her raged on. She unfolded the papers, scanning the clauses with a growing sense of urgency. The legalese was tedious, but then her eyes stopped on a familiar name, comical vineyard estate caught in her throat. She read the words again, as though they might change to Julia Carmichael. I leave the Carmichael vineyard estate and all associated assets. The vineyard, her vineyard. Julia's hands trembled as she read the words. The Carmichael Vineyard was a sprawling property known for producing some of the finest wines in the country. She had only visited once during a family holiday. The trip had been a blur of unspoken resentments and quiet indignities. Eric's family had treated her like a servant, assigning her menial tasks while they indulged in luxury. At the time, she had never imagined that she would one day be in a position to own the very vineyard that had seemed so untouchable. And yet here it was, her inheritance, as real and tangible as the weight of the paper in her hands. A pang of unease settled in her chest. This wasn't just a significant inheritance. It was monumental. A legacy so grand, so intertwined with the Carmichael name, it made her question everything she thought she knew. Why would Richard, in all his wisdom and experience, leave her the outsider, the one who had never fully owned such a gift? Was it really a gift, or was there something deeper? Or was there something darker at play? Determined to find answers, Julia made her decision. She will visit the vineyard. Whatever her suspicions, whatever doubts clung to her heart, she needed to see it for herself. The lawyer had handed her the keys, and with them, the official documents transferred ownership. It was hers now, whether she understood why or not. The following morning, Julia set out early, the pale light of dawn breaking through the mist as she drove down the long, tree-lined driveway. Her modest sedan, a far cry from the luxury cars that once graced the Carmichael estate, felt out of place against the grandeur of the land. She couldn't help but feel small, almost insignificant, as she made her way to the vineyard. The field stretched endlessly on either side, rows of grape vines bathed in the soft light of morning mist. The vineyard looked more alive than it ever had before. In the distance, workers moved through the fields, their movements swift and practiced. Each step a reflection of years spent cultivating this land. As she pulled up to the grand house at the heart of the property, she felt a strange sense of awe. The stone facade, though weathered by time, retains an air of elegance. It was a house that had seen generations of the Carmichael family pass through its halls, and now it would be hers. Stepping out of the car, Julia was met by a tall man who approached with purpose. His salt and pepper hair frames a weathered face, one that spoke of years spent in the sun. He moved with an air of quiet authority, his expression one of cautious curiosity. "You must be Julia," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Henry, the vineyard manager. Mr. Carmichael spoke highly of you." Julia blinked, taken aback. "He spoke highly of me," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry nodded, his gaze steady but warm. He didn't share much, but he always mentioned how you were the only one who treated people with kindness, even when you didn't have to. He said you had a good heart better than most of his family. The words hit her harder than she expected. Richard had noticed her? All those years she had assumed he barely acknowledged her presence. And yet, there it was the evidence of a relationship she hadn't even known existed. For a moment, Julia stood frozen, the weight of Henry's words sinking in. Her throat tightened, and she had to swallow hard to keep her composure. Richard had seen her. He had understood something about her that no one else had. Henry gestured toward the house, breaking her reverie. Come inside. There's much to discuss. As they walked toward the grand entrance, Julia's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The vineyard was hers now. But what did that mean? What had Richard seen in her that had led him to make such a decision? What was she supposed to do with this legacy? Inside, the house was just as grand as she had imagined, with high ceilings and ancient wood beams that spoke of centuries of history. The scent of old oak mingled with the faint aroma of wine, a legacy that lies in the soil outside. Henry led her into a spacious room, where a large oak desk sat beneath a tall window that overlooked the vineyard. This was Mr. Carmichael's office, Henry explained, moving to the desk. "It's yours now, so you decide to take the reins." Julia sat down at the desk, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her shoulders. As she flipped out the window at the rows of grape vines stretching endlessly before her, she realized that this was more than just an inheritance. This was a responsibility, a challenge, a new chapter in her life. And somehow, she felt ready to step into a world she had once thought was beyond her reach, ready to uncover the mysteries that Richard had left behind, not just for the Carmichael legacy itself. In Henry's study, the quiet atmosphere of the room made her feel more anxious and curious. Henry invited her, and after leading her through a long corridor, where the dim light from the classical chandeliers painted a hazy image on the walls. The air in the study was filled with the scent of leather, mixed with the gentle sound of old books rustling. The shelves filled with papers and books created a very special space, as if this place contained secrets and stories. Henry gently pushed the door open, his eyes softening discreetly over Julia before stopping at the desk. "There's something you should see," he said, his voice warm and sure. On the desk was a pile of neatly arranged letters, envelope bearing her name, and the delicate handwriting of Richard's pure character. These letters arrived before he died, Henry explained, his eyes glinting with sadness. "He kept it for me until now." Julia hesitated, her hands moving lightly as she took the first envelope. The paper was a heavy, pale when she opened it, and when she could not find the slightly shaky, elegant handwriting that was Richard's. She began to read, and was glad to realize that everything Richard had written was a secret that had never been expressed clearly to anyone. Dear Julia. If you are reading this, it means I am dead, and you are caught up in the tangles of the Carmichael family. I am sorry for that, but I had to make sure you were taken care of. You are probably wondering why I left you the vineyard. The truth is, I admired you more than I could ever say. You were good, fighting and loyal in a way my son never deserved. When Eric betrayed you, it hurt me. I saw so much of myself in himself and blind to what really mattered. Julia continued, tears welling up in her eyes. She could not believe that Richard, the man she had always respected and loved, could understand her so well. She continued reading, not as if his words brought her any sense of comfort. The little garden has always been a product of honesty and hard work. I can't trust Eric to keep it, but you have the strength and the product to grow it. I hope this gift will bring you the stability and peace you deserve. Important. Richard Carmichael. Julia put down the letter, feeling like a mountain had been lifted from her heart. Richard's words were not only an apology, but also a recognition. She had always felt like an outsider, never really important in this family, but now she realized that she was worth more than she thought. And then perhaps nothing could surprise her more. The next letters would reveal more secrets that Richard had kept hidden for so many years. He wrote about regret as a father, about disappointment with Eric's choices, about past mistakes, and finally the hope that Julia would find true happiness, something he could not give her. Those lines seemed to open up another world, where she was no longer an outsider, but the chosen one, the only one who could continue Richard's legacy. But the joy that had just bloomed in Julia's heart was quickly extinguished when a shadowy figure appeared at the door. The door to the study opened and Eric stepped in, his tempered glass exploding with anger. "This is so wrong," he shouted, startling Julia. "This vineyard is mine. My father had no right to decide like that." Julia did not flinch, still standing there, eyes fixed on Eric. He had every right. He did the right thing, she replied, her voice calm but firm. "This vineyard is mine. Eric paused, his eyes flashing with anger. Then he sneered. "Do you really think you can manage an asset like this? You're just a member. You don't understand business. Sell it to me, Julia, and you won't have to deal with it anymore." Julia clasped her hands together, anger bubbling inside her. "I'm not selling," she said. Her voice cold. "And if you think you can force me to change my mind, you're wasting your time. Eric moved closer, his expression growing darker. "You don't know, Julia. You don't know anything." He walked out of the room, leaving behind a tense and tense election. Julia stood there, her heart strong, but with a strange feeling, as if everything was coming back clearer than ever. Richard's legacy was not just material possessions, but also a constant battle between the past and the future, between the wrong choices and the only decisions that could determine the path one would take. Julia stood on the balcony of the main house, looking out, watching the rolling hills stretching endlessly under the golden afternoon sun. The atmosphere here was different, no longer the silence of a land falling into oblivion, but instead prosperity was gradually returning. The laughter of the workers mixed with the sound of machinery, of trucks coming in and out, all seemed to be singing a song of revival. That feeling that had not appeared in her heart for so long, made Julia feel a stronger belief than ever in her decision. She took a deep breath, trying to control the excitement rising in her heart. What she had done today with Eric was something she had never dared to imagine before. Facing him head on, without avoidance, was a huge step for her. One she would never have thought of taking just a few months ago, when she was still struggling with her own decisions. "You can leave," Julia said, her eyes never leaving Eric, who was standing opposite, seemingly in disbelief at what had just happened. "Or I will ask the security to take you out immediately." Eric opened his mouth to say something, before he could say it, Julia raised her hand, signaling him to be quiet. She was no longer afraid, no longer the weak woman of the past, who had only known how to hide in the shadow of a dead husband. Now Julia was the woman in charge of this vineyard, the only one who had the right to decide its future. Eric stood still, as if facing a completely different Julia. A flash of anger flashed in his eyes, and then he abruptly turned and left without another word. The door behind him slammed shut, echoing loudly in the quiet space. His car sped away, the tires screeching on the gravel road, leaving a quiet, heavy, haunting space. Julia lowered herself onto the wooden chair on the balcony. Her shoulders relaxed, but inside her was a fierce undercurrent. Looking out at the vast sky, where the sunset was slowly fading, she felt a new freedom, she had longed for. For many years since Richard's death, she had lived in anxiety, like a shadow moving silently in the darkness. But today she had stood firm against Eric, had conquered herself. And now Julia was no longer a woman dependent on the pity or power of others. 2 weeks after her tense meeting with Julia received a summons to court. The rumors that Eric would sue her were no longer vague threats. He was taking action. Eric was contesting Richard's will, claiming that she was incompetent to manage the vineyard, she had abused his trust. This was not a big surprise to Julia, but the thought of entering a legal battle weighed heavily on her heart. The first day of the trial was dramatic, like a no-holds-barred battle. Eric showed up with a team of expensive lawyers, each one of them confident, as if victory was within their grasp. Julia, meanwhile, had only one lawyer, an older man whom Richard had introduced in his letters. Walter was a very calm man who seemed never to lose his temper under any circumstances. The way he spoke, word for word, exuded the certainty and experience of a lawyer who had devoted his life to his profession. Eric continued to attack Julia with venomous words. He claimed that Richard had been manipulated, that Julia had used pressure to force him to change the will. Richard's distant relatives and a few old witnesses expressing disbelief in her management ability. They said that Julia was just a young wife with nothing but ambition and greed. These words were like a sharp knife cutting into her heart. Each sentence was like rubbing salt into the old pains, the judgments she had faced throughout her unhappy marriage. But when all hope seemed lost, Walter stood up. He began with a simple but powerful sentence, completely changing the atmosphere in the room. Your Honor, he said, his voice calm but clear. This case is based entirely on speculation and defamation. Our evidence is the letters that Richard left behind, that clearly show that he was in his right mind when he decided to choose his heir. Walter gently placed a stack of documents on the table, turned the pages, and then showed them to the judge and the opposing lawyers. In them were letters that Richard had written, full of heartfelt words, clearly expressing his will and strong belief in Julia's abilities. Julia silently observed everything. Even though her heart was filled with waves of emotions, she remained calm. Walter's confidence was the only source of strength she needed at this moment. She had heard endless ridicule and criticism from her own loved ones. But today she would not let herself be defeated by those lies anymore. This battle, although difficult and full of challenges, Julia was ready to face it. And in every step she took, she was no longer a woman who only knew how to wait for fate. She chose to fight for her own future, for the survival and development of the vineyard that Richard had entrusted to her. When the judge made a temporary decision, everyone was silent, waiting. However, in Julia's eyes, a great belief began to form. She knew that her journey had just begun, but it would be a journey that could not be turned back. The entire courtroom seemed to stop as the judge opened the folder containing Richard's handwritten letters to Julia. The dim light from the window shone down, reflecting coldly on the ancient wooden tables and chairs arranged neatly around the room. The room was silent, except for the gentle sound of each page being turned, like a choked melody of promises that had long been kept in Richard's heart. Each letter was an undeniable proof of his clear and definite wishes. When the judge read to the end, his eyes looked up, without needing to say anything more. Everyone in the room understood there was nothing more to argue about. Julia and Richard's story had been written through each line, and now those wishes would be realized. The conversations in the letters that Richard had for her were all clearly revealed. Julia, you are the person I trust to carry on and grow my legacy. In you, I see the values I want to continue, kindness, resilience, and integrity. That was one of the sentences in the letter the judge had just read, and it was enough to silence Eric, who was standing below with a stony face. When Walter rose to speak, his words struck Eric like a deadly blow. Your Honor, Mr. Carmichael did not leave this vineyard to my client on a whim. He chose Julia because of the qualities she embodied, kindness, resilience, and integrity. Qualities that I dare say are not found in the defendant. Eric's face was red, his previous confidence completely shattered. How many times had he thought that the ownership of this land would be his? And now, seeing the picture so clearly, he could do nothing but swallow the threats that were ready to come out. The judge said nothing more, just nodded. The decision had been made. This decision meant not only the legal recognition of Richard's will, but also Julia's victory that surpassed all doubts and attempts to discredit Eric. Eric left the courtroom in a rage, his footsteps echoing through the wide corridor. The court doors closed behind him, taking with them the fragments of a collapsed illusion. But Julia, on the other hand, did not feel any bragging victory. She just smiled gently and returned to her work. Because she knew that this battle was just beginning. Months passed, and under Julia's leadership, the vineyard began to transform. With the support of Henry, a trusted companion, Julia not only maintained producing quality, but also expanded sustainable agricultural methods. New technologies and modern distribution methods helped the vineyard gain attention from major distributors. Julia's brand became known not only as a producer of high-end wines, but also as a symbol of innovation and ambition. People around her, from partners to customers, began to see her as a strong, and talented woman in business. And then, one day, when Julia was walking through the vineyard, the phone in her hand suddenly rang. A call from a reporter from a major magazine. He announced that Julia had been chosen to be on the cover of next month's issue, with an interview detailing her journey from the days of betrayal to inheriting the vineyard and rebuilding her career. We wanted a truly inspirational story, one that could motivate anyone who was going through a difficult time, the reporter said. Julia was hesitant, not very keen on fame, but she finally agreed to participate. However, when the article was published a month later, Julia could not have imagined that it would create such a huge wave. Her story was written in great detail, not only about the changes in her life, but also about the values she always pursued from betrayal to victory, who turned suffering into a prosperous legacy. Along with the brilliant photos of Julia standing in the middle of the vineyard, her face full of confidence and pride, the article truly touched the hearts of many people. What is special is that the article quoted passages from Richard's letters, highlighting the respect and admiration he had for Julia. Her story became an inspiration for those who always believe that in any challenge, resilience and virtue will always lead to success. The responses from readers kept coming, one after another, all praising Julia's strength and intelligence. Eric, on the other hand, after reading the article, was left with only anger. His name became the object of public criticism, and his wife soon decided to leave him, taking with her the majority of the family's remaining assets. Eric's reputation and finances were both in shambles. Julia, in a moment of thoughtlessness, felt that justice had been served. A part of her, though she did not want to admit it, felt a little joy at seeing the downfall of the person who had caused her pain. One evening, sitting on the porch of the vineyard, Julia looked out into the distance, where the rows of grapes stretched out like a green carpet, the sky beginning to turn red with the sunset. Suddenly, her eyes stopped on a small envelope, placed quietly beside the old wooden table. This envelope, with its faint outline, was like an object that suddenly appeared after a long time. She opened it and found an old diary of Richard's that she had not paid attention to in the past months. When she opened the diary, there was a letter hidden inside. Feeling as if time had stopped, Julia began to read Richard's words again. Those words seemed to come back, talking about the pride he had in Julia, about the hope he had placed in her. Each word was like a part of his legacy. But this time she clearly felt that it was not just a legacy of land or property, but also a legacy of love, care and forgiveness. Julia stood at the edge of the sprawling vineyard. The late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the rows of grapevine vines. The air was rich with the earthy aroma of ripened fruit, and the golden light seemed to embrace the land, bathing it in warmth. She carefully unfolded the letter in her hands, its edges softened by time, but the words still etched into her soul with a quiet intensity. Dear Julia, it began, and her heart skipped a beat. If you're reading this, you've embraced the vineyard and made it your own. I have no doubt you face challenges, but I hope you've also found joy and fulfillment. You deserve better than what my son gave you, and I regret not stepping in sooner. But you've proven something to me. Strength isn't loud or aggressive, it's quiet and steady, like the roots of these vines. I hope this place becomes a sanctuary for you as it was for me. And remember, Julia. Julia. The vineyard's success isn't measured in profits or awards. It's measured in the lives it touches the workers, the workers, and the people who drink its wine. Keep that in your heart always. Keep that in your heart always. Sincerely, Richard. Sincerely, Richard. Julia wiped away the tears that had unexpectedly welled up in her eyes. She folded the letter carefully. The words of Richard Carmichael offering more than a simple inheritance they had given her a sense of purpose. She had longed for all her life. As a young woman, Julia had always felt like a shadow in her own life, overlooked and dismissed by Eric and his family. They had never seen her worth, but Richard had recognized something in her that no one else had quiet strength. Years had passed since Richard's death, and the vineyard had flourished under her care, just as he had hoped. No longer was it merely a piece of property. It had become a symbol of her triumph over the years of neglect and silence. Julia had poured her heart and soul into the land, cultivating not just the vines, but also the relationships that had once been absent. With every harvest, she felt herself rooted deeper into the land that had now become her true home. It had taken time, but Julia had found her rhythm. At first, she was overwhelmed by the responsibility. The vineyard was not just a business, it was a living entity, with needs and demands, each season presenting its own set of challenges. But she had persevered, learning from the land and the workers who had shared their wisdom with her. She had gained their trust, just as Richard had, and in return, they had given her the confidence to push forward. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the harvest season was drawing to a close, Julia hosted an event that had become a tradition in the community, the Harvest Festival. It had started as a small gathering, to celebrate the fruits of the labor and share the bounty of the season. But over the years, it had grown into a lively celebration, attracting families, friends, and even tourists who had heard of the vineyard's legacy. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and music as guests wandered through the fields, glasses of wine in hand. Julia moved through the crowd, greeting each guest with a warm smile, her heart swelling with pride as she saw the joy on their faces. The vineyard had become more than just a place of work, it had become a place of connection, of shared experiences. People came not just for the wine, but for the sense of community it offered. Julia paused near the edge of the vineyard, where a simple stone plaque had been placed in Richard's honor. It was a humble tribute, but it was everything. The plaque read in memory of Richard Carmichael, a legacy of integrity and resilience. As she read the inscription, a wave of peace washed over her. Richard's vision had been realized not just in the success of the vineyard, but in the way it had touched the lives of those around it. As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Sarah, one of the workers who had been with the early days of her ownership. Julia Sarah called out, a wide smile on her face. You've done it. Look at this place. It's more than just a vineyard. It's a home. Julia smiled warmly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I couldn't have done it without all of you. Without the community, she glanced around at the people laughing and talking, the children running through the fields, the older couples sipping wine and reminiscing. This is what it's all about. This is what Richard saw. It's not about the money or the awards, it's about the people. Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with pride. You've given us more than just a place to work. You've given us a place to belong. Julia turned her gaze back to the fields, where the last rays of the sun were casting long shadows across the rows of vines. The vineyard had become something that couldn't be measured in numbers or accolades. It had become a part of the community, a testament to the resilience of those who tended it. And it had become a part of Julia too. She was no longer the woman who had been overlooked. She was the woman who had made the vineyard her own. And in doing so, had created something far greater than she ever imagined. In the years that followed, the vineyard continued to thrive. It was no longer just a business. It had become a sanctuary for Julia who had found their way to it. The workers, the guests, the community, all of them had a place in its story. And Julia, standing at the edge of the vineyard, knew that Richard's legacy would live on for generations to come. The wind rustled through the vines, carrying with it the whispers of the past and the promise of the future. Julia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the land beneath her feet, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. A few months later, Julia stood before the grape beans, the cool breeze tousling her hair as she gazed at the vineyard's full splendor. The harvest had been particularly bountiful that year, and the winery was abuzz with activity, preparing for the upcoming tasting event. But Julia's mind was elsewhere on the legacy she was continuing to build, on the future she was shaping. Her thoughts turned to Eric, Richard's son, who had once claimed ownership of the vineyard but had shown little interest in its future. It was a painful subject, one she had tried to avoid, but she knew the day would come when she would have to face it. Eric had never understood what Richard had seen, what had made him trust her with the vineyard. But Julia didn't need Eric's approval anymore. She had found something deeper than validation. She had found her purpose. One evening, as she walked through the vineyards, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Julia, it said, soft yet firm. She turned to see Liam, one of the new managers she had hired, a close confidant over the past year. Liam, she greeted him with a smile. Is everything going well with the new harvest? He nodded. A smile tugging at his lips. Everything's going better than expected. People are raving about the wine. It's going to be a great year. Julia felt a rush of pride. It's not just the wine. It's everything. The people, the community, the care we put into every bottle. That's what matters. Liam's gaze softened as he nodded. I've never worked at a place like this. It's more than just a job. It feels like family. Julia's heart swelled as she looked out over the vineyard. The rows of vines stretching far into the distance. The vineyard had become more than a business. It had become a legacy, a testament to the quiet strength that had carried her through the darkest of times. As she walked back toward the winery, the wind rustling the leaves around her, she knew in her heart that Richard's words had been right. Success was not measured by profits or awards. It was measured in the lives it touched, the hearts it nurtured, and the quiet strength that would carry it forward for generations to come. And with that, Julia smiled, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that the vineyard and the community that had embraced her would always be her greatest accomplishment.